They say a father feels an unbreakable bond with his child the moment they hold them for the first time. I waited for that moment. I waited through the sleepless nights, the first steps, the birthdays. But deep down, something always felt off. I told myself it was in my head, that I just needed more time to connect. But the guilt never went away. One night, after too many drinks and too many sleepless thoughts, I finally broke down and told my wife about it. I expected comfort, reassurance, something to ease my self-doubt. Instead, she froze. Her eyes welled up immediately, and before I could say another word, she was sobbing uncontrollably. It wasn't the reaction I expected. Not anger, not sadness. Pure, uncontrollable panic. My stomach twisted. I reached for her hand, trying to calm her down, but she pulled away. And then, between ragged breaths, she whispered something that made my entire body go numb. "He's not yours." It was quiet, almost lost between her sobs, but I heard it. I heard it like a gunshot. For a second, I thought I had misheard. My brain refused to process it. I repeated her words, waiting for her to correct me, to tell me I was wrong. But she just nodded, hands covering her face. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I felt like the walls were closing in on me. What did she mean he wasn't mine? My child, my son, wasn't mine? The weight of those words crushed me before she even had the chance to explain. And then she did. She started talking, words tumbling out between sobs, and somehow, it got even worse. She had been having an affair. Not with a stranger, not with an old boyfriend. With him, my brother, my own flesh and blood. The betrayal sank its claws deep, twisting inside me like a knife. My brother, the person I had grown up with, the person I had trusted more than anyone, had been sleeping with my wife since shortly after our wedding. My entire marriage had been a lie. I tried to speak, but nothing came out. My throat was dry. My hands trembled. The room felt too small, suffocating. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to make it all stop, but I couldn't. I just sat there, listening, as she admitted how long it had been going on. 3 years. 3 entire years of deception, of lying to my face, of pretending to love me while sharing a bed with my own brother. The weight of it all pressed down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. And then the final blow came. The child I had spent years raising, the child I had tried so hard to bond with despite the strange distance I always felt. He wasn't mine. He was his, my brother's son. The reason I had felt disconnected wasn't my fault. It had never been about me. My instincts had been screaming at me all along, warning me that something was wrong. And now I finally understood why. I felt sick, betrayed, broken. My entire world had shattered in a single night, and I had no idea how to put it back together. The woman I had loved, the woman I had built a life with, had destroyed it all without hesitation. And my brother, the one person who was supposed to have my back, had been the one driving the knife into it this whole time. I had never felt so alone, so utterly, completely alone. She begged for forgiveness, swore it had meant nothing, swore she still loved me, but how could I believe a single word that came out of her mouth? She had been lying for years. What was one more lie to her? Every tear, every plea, felt like another manipulation, another way to keep me under her control. But I was done. I was so done. As I sat there, staring at the woman I no longer recognized, only one thought ran through my mind. This isn't over, because betrayal like this doesn't just destroy trust, it burns everything to the ground. And I was about to watch the fire spread. I barely slept that night. My mind raced with every possible emotion. Rage, heartbreak, humiliation. By morning, I had made up my mind. I was getting a divorce. There was nothing left to save. My marriage had been a lie, my wife had betrayed me, and my brother had stabbed me in the back. I didn't care what it took. I was done. But as soon as I mentioned divorce to my parents, I realized something that made my blood run cold. They didn't care. Worse than that, they wanted me to stay. At first, I thought they just didn't understand the severity of what had happened. So I told them everything. I laid it all out. The affair, the betrayal, the fact that the child wasn't mine. I expected shock, anger, even disgust. But instead, my mother sighed. My father rubbed his temples, and the first words out of his mouth weren't about my pain. You need to think about this carefully. Think about what carefully. My wife had a secret life with my brother, and they thought I should pause before leaving her? Then came the truth, the part that hurt almost as much as the betrayal itself. They didn't care about my feelings. They didn't care about my dignity. They only cared about money. My wife's father had invested in our family business years ago, and that investment had kept us financially stable. If I divorced her, if I exposed the truth, her father would pull out. Our business, my parents' legacy, would suffer. That was their concern. Not me, not their son, just the money. I sat there, staring at them in disbelief. I had just had my world ripped apart, and instead of supporting me, they were treating me like a liability. Like my pain was an inconvenience. My mother even had the audacity to suggest that I should forgive my wife and move past it for the sake of the family business. The child still needs a father, she added, as if I had any obligation to raise my brother's son. My stomach turned. These weren't my parents. They were strangers. The more they talked, the angrier I got. They wanted me to sacrifice everything. My dignity, my self-respect, my mental health, just to keep up appearances, just to protect their finances. And the worst part? They didn't even ask me how I felt. Not once. They didn't ask if I was okay, if I needed support, if I was surviving this nightmare. To them, my pain was nothing compared to their bottom line. That was the moment I realized the betrayal ran deeper than just my wife and my brother. My own parents had abandoned me. They had chosen money over me without hesitation. It was like I didn't even matter. The child they raised, the son they were supposed to love unconditionally. He was disposable the second he became an obstacle to their financial security. And I wasn't going to stand for it. I made my choice right then and there. If they wanted to side with my wife, with her family, with his family, they could. But I wasn't going to be a pawn in their game. I told them I was going through with the divorce, no matter what it cost them. And more than that, I was exposing everything. My wife's betrayal, my brother's affair, their manipulation. If they thought they could control me with guilt and obligation, they were about to learn otherwise. They panicked. They tried to reason with me, tried to tell me I was overreacting. My father even had the nerve to say, "People work through worse in marriage." Worse? What the hell could be worse than this? But I wasn't listening anymore. I had spent my entire life being the good son, the one who did what was expected, the one who never made waves. That version of me was dead. This wasn't just about my marriage anymore. This was about reclaiming my life. As I walked out of my parents' house that day, I knew there was no going back. I had burned that bridge and I had no regrets. Because if I was going to lose my family, I was going to make damn sure they lost something too. And they had no idea what was coming next. I wasted no time. The next day, I met with a lawyer. I wanted out of the marriage, I wanted my name off that birth certificate, and I wanted nothing to do with my brother or my parents ever again. But, of course, things weren't that simple. The legal process was a nightmare. Even though the DNA test proved the child wasn't mine, the law didn't automatically wipe away my responsibilities. I had to fight, and I was ready for war. My wife, ex-wife, as I started calling her in my head, was in full panic mode. She swore she never meant to hurt me. She begged me to reconsider, to at least stay in the child's life. But the crocodile tears didn't work anymore. I had spent years being manipulated by her, by my family, by my own sense of duty. Not anymore. She could raise his kid without me. I wasn't going to be trapped in a life built on lies. But the hardest part? My brother, that coward. He never once reached out. Not to apologize, not to explain. He just disappeared. It was like he thought if he stayed quiet long enough, the storm would pass. But I wasn't about to let him slither away without consequences. I made sure everyone knew what he had done. My friends, his boss, his girlfriend. Oh yeah, he had a girlfriend. And I made damn sure she knew exactly who she was dating. And then there were my parents. I had warned them that if they kept choosing money over me, they'd pay for it. But they didn't listen. So when I exposed everything, the affair, the lies, the reason they wanted me to stay married, the fallout hit them hard. My ex-wife's father wasn't just disappointed. He was furious. The second he found out how they had tried to use his investment as leverage against me, he pulled every cent out of their business. Just like that, their empire collapsed. It was almost poetic. The same people who told me to think carefully about my decisions never once considered the consequences of their own. They gambled my happiness away for money, and in the end, they lost everything. I should have felt guilty watching their business crumble, but I didn't, not even a little. If they had ever put my well-being above their bank account, maybe things would have been different. But they didn't, so why the hell should I care? Meanwhile, my ex was drowning. She had gone from a comfortable life with financial stability to a single mother with no support. My brother? He walked away scot-free. No legal repercussions. No financial obligations. He just got to keep living his life while I spent months in court proving I had no responsibility for his child. It wasn't fair. But if there was one thing I had learned from this mess, it was that life wasn't fair. Still, I refused to be a victim. I fought tooth and nail, and in the end, I won. I was legally free. No child support. No visitation rights. My name erased from every document that had ever tied me to that child. It was over. The weight that had been crushing me for 3 years was finally lifted. But as I walked out of that courthouse, I realized something. Winning didn't feel like I thought it would. Because when you burn everything down, there's nothing left to go back to. No wife, no child, no parents, no brother, just me, standing in the ashes of the life I had spent years building. Free, yes, but also completely alone. And for the first time in my life, I had to figure out who I was without them. The first few weeks after the legal battle were strange. I had spent so much time fighting, against my ex, against my family, against the system, that I didn't know what to do with myself once it was over. I woke up every day expecting another crisis, another betrayal, another battle. But there was nothing, just silence, just me. It should have been a relief, but instead, it felt empty, like I had spent so long running on adrenaline that I had no idea how to function without it. That's when the real weight of everything hit me. The grief, the anger, the loneliness. I had lost my wife, my child, my parents, and my brother all in one move. Sure, they had betrayed me, but that didn't make the loss any less painful. I had spent years building a life that no longer existed. And the hardest part? Realizing that no matter how much I hated them, a part of me still wished things had been different. That I still wanted a family, just not the one I had. I knew I needed help. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I went to therapy. First, it felt stupid. I hated talking about my feelings, hated the idea of being vulnerable. But I had hit rock bottom, and if I didn't start climbing out, I was going to drown in my own bitterness. So I talked about the betrayal, the rage, the guilt, the shame. And slowly, I started to make sense of it all. Started to accept that I wasn't weak for feeling hurt. That I wasn't broken just because I had been lied to. Took time. A lot of time. But little by little, I started to rebuild. I focused on work, on friendships, on myself. I cut off my family completely. Blocked numbers, deleted photos, erased them from my life as if they had never existed. It was the only way to move forward. They had made their choice and I had made mine. And I wasn't going to spend another second chasing love from people who had already proven they didn't deserve me. As for my ex, I never spoke to her again. Last I heard, she was struggling. My brother, still the same coward he had always been. And my parents, they moved away, ashamed and bitter, blaming me for their downfall instead of their own selfishness. But that wasn't my problem anymore. I had spent my whole life trying to be the perfect son, the perfect husband. And where had that gotten me? Nowhere. So for the first time ever, I was living for myself. It wasn't easy. Some nights, the anger still crept in. Some mornings, the loneliness still hit me like a truck. But every day, it got a little easier. Every day, I felt a little lighter. And one day, without even realizing it, I woke up and felt something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Peace. I'm not saying I've completely healed. I don't think you ever fully heal from something like this. But I've accepted it. I've learned from it. And most importantly, I've moved on. I don't look back anymore. Because the past is exactly where it belongs, behind me. And the future? For the first time in years, it's finally mine to create.